Have you ever felt like you're walking alone through an endless tunnel where not even a spark seems to ignite? If you've ever felt like God was silent, like your prayers bounced off the ceiling, this story is for you. But before we begin, I invite you to subscribe if you believe that faith can transform even the most broken heart. Here, we share stories that touch the soul and awaken hope. Turn on the bell to not miss any of these stories that God can use to speak to you. Let's begin. It was night in Daniela's soul. And not just any night. It was the kind of darkness that even the dawn doesn't promise to dispel. She was 27, with a faded smile and a heart in pieces. Years ago, she had dreamed of serving God as a missionary, healing souls, bringing bread and the word, but now she could barely hold herself together. Her mother had just passed away, and the diagnosis was cruel and swift: terminal cancer. Her father was never there, and her faith, the one that once lit every corner of her life, now seemed like a damp match in the middle of a storm. "Where are you, God?" she whispered in the early hours. "Why don't you answer me?" Silence. It was all silence. Daniela worked cleaning in a small neighborhood hospital, and although physical exhaustion wore her down, the heaviest weight was within her. Every night when she left, she would pass by a closed church. She'd stop for a moment, look at the cross high above, and cry. She cried without words, because sometimes, when the soul doesn't find answers, all it can do is cry. But what Daniela didn't know was that God had already started writing the greatest miracle of her life. Have you ever felt like Daniela? Write in the comments. I too walked in the shadow, if this story has already begun to touch your heart. That night, like so many others, Daniela left the hospital dragging her feet. Her shoes were soaked from the rain, and her soul even more so. The sky cried with her, as if the entire world understood her mourning. As she walked on the slippery sidewalk, something different happened. Passing in front of the church, the same one she passed every night, she saw a small light shining on the altar through the side stained glass window. The main door, for the first time in weeks, was slightly open. She hesitated. Should I go in? And for what? She said to herself. What am I coming for? To speak to someone who no longer listens to me. But her steps, as if guided by an invisible whisper, crossed the threshold. Inside, an elderly man was sweeping slowly. Noticing her presence, he lifted his gaze and smiled, as if he already knew she was coming. Good evening, daughter. God was waiting for you. Daniela felt a shiver. No one had called her daughter since her mother passed away. No one seemed to see what she carried. But this man did. I just wanted to be here for a moment. I expect nothing. Just silence, she said, her voice broken. The old man nodded gently. Then you've come to the right place. Here, even silence speaks to God. She sat in the last pew. The temple was almost empty, but something began to fill her from the inside. It wasn't joy. It was comfort. A warm comfort, like a blanket over her wounded soul. And then, for the first time in a long time, she didn't ask for anything. She just closed her eyes and let the tears speak. Has it ever happened to you that someone said exactly what you needed to hear without you asking for it? Write in the comments. God spoke to me in the silence, if you've ever felt that way. And if this story is touching your soul, don't forget to subscribe to keep receiving these messages that illuminate the shadow. The clock struck 10:47 p.m. Daniela sat in silence while the rain gently hit the stained glass windows of the temple. She felt a strange peace, as if the pain had finally found a place to rest. The elderly man, who continued sweeping with a patience that seemed heavenly, approached slowly. He had tired eyes, but they were bright, and his voice was soft, like a prayer. Sometimes God doesn't respond with words, he said, without her asking anything. Sometimes he simply sits with us in the shadow. Daniela looked at him, surprised. How did he know exactly what she was feeling? Who are you? She asked cautiously. The man smiled. A soul that also walked in darkness. And I learned that before receiving the light, the soul must learn to walk in the shadow. Her heart trembled at his words. But it hurts, she murmured. I feel like I'll never get out of this. I lost my mom. I lost my faith, and I don't know how to keep going. The old man sat next to her, without invading her space, just being there. Your mom hasn't gone, Daniela. Love doesn't die, it just changes form. And faith. Sometimes faith falls to the ground, but God has hands to lift it up. She couldn't hold back her tears. It was as if that man had picked up every broken piece of her soul, one by one. And how does one start to believe again? She asked, sobbing. The old man looked at her with infinite tenderness. With small steps, sometimes all it takes is to open your heart and let God in, even if it's just through a crack. Have you ever felt like you didn't have the strength to go on, but someone showed up with exactly what you needed? Right. God always arrives on time. In the comments if you've ever experienced that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story if you feel someone else needs to hear it. In the following days, Daniela returned to the church every night after work. Not out of habit, but out of necessity. That door, once closed, was now always slightly open. And every time she entered, the elderly man was there, as if he had never left. Today, I brought something for you, he said one night, extending a simple notebook. It's your new beginning. Daniela took it with curiosity. A journal? No. It's a notebook of encounters. Here, you will write every moment when you see a glimpse of God, no matter how small. She hesitated. I don't know if I'll see anything. You will, the old man replied firmly. But first, you must learn to look differently. Sometimes the miracle isn't that the pain disappears, but that we learn to walk with it without it breaking us. That night, Daniela went home with the notebook under her arm. And when she arrived, she opened it. She didn't write anything, but she left one blank page with a single word in the center. Here I am, God. That was her first prayer in weeks. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a complaint. It was a surrender. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she was able to sleep without crying. Do you remember the first time you spoke to God again after a period of silence? Right. Here I am, God, in the comments if the story resonates with your heart. And if you want to write your own encounters with Him, get a notebook and start today. Sometimes, faith begins with a blank page. Subscribe to follow this story of transformation and hope. The week passed slowly, but something had changed. Daniela continued living in the same gray city, with the same problems, the same stained hospital uniform, but her gaze was no longer the same. Every night she wrote in the notebook, at first just scattered phrases. Today, a patient thanked me. The coffee was hot, just when I needed it most. I saw a child laugh in the middle of the hospital hallway. Small glimpses, tiny lights, but lights nonetheless. And the more she wrote, the more her soul opened. She began to notice that God hadn't abandoned her, but had been in the details, in the silent comfort, in the constant presence of that elderly man. One rainy night, Daniela entered the church soaked. The elderly man was waiting for her with a blanket. Today, I saw a lady praying for her sick son, Daniela said, while drying her hair. She wasn't pleading desperately. She prayed with confidence. How do you get to that point? The elderly man looked at her with tenderness. Trust doesn't come in sunny days, daughter. It's forged in the storm. God doesn't want you to pretend everything is fine. He wants you to learn to trust even when everything seems lost. Daniela took a deep breath. Sometimes trusting scares me. It's like letting go of the edge of the abyss. It is, he replied. But the beautiful thing is that when you let go, you discover that you're not falling. You're being held. And in that instant, for the first time in a long time, Daniela smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because she was starting to believe that one day it would be. Have you ever had moments when you discovered God in the small details? Right. I saw God in the simple. If you've ever felt that in your life, like if this story is touching your heart, and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe so we can continue growing in faith together. One Friday afternoon, Daniela arrived at the church with a firmer step than usual. She had a folded letter in her hand and the notebook was already full of pages. The elderly man greeted her with a different smile, as if he knew that tonight would be special. Today I'm not here to ask, nor to cry, Daniela said as she sat down. Today I'm here to give thanks. The elderly man nodded. Tell me, my soul still hurts, but I've learned to walk with it. I no longer drag the weight. I'm not afraid of the darkness anymore. I know that the light dwells within me, even when I can't see it. She handed him the notebook. He opened it and ran his fingers over the handwritten phrases. Each page was a testimony. Each word, a step in the shadow toward faith. And the letter? He asked gently. Daniela took a deep breath. It's for my mom. I wrote everything I couldn't tell her when she was alive. I don't want my words to remain trapped in pain. The elderly man carefully took the letter, as if it were sacred. Then today is the day when the shadow stops being a punishment and becomes the path. They walked together to the garden behind the temple. There, next to a small wooden cross, Daniela folded the letter and buried it under a flower she had planted weeks before. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She simply closed her eyes and surrendered her soul to peace. Do you have words hidden in your heart that you need to release? Write in the comments. Today I let go of my pain and take that step of faith. Sometimes, writing a letter to heaven is the beginning of healing. Subscribe if you're learning to walk through the shadow, knowing that God is guiding you toward the light. The days turned into weeks, and Daniela was no longer the same. Her eyes still carried stories, but no longer of defeat, but of resurrection. One ordinary afternoon, she arrived at the church and found something she didn't expect. The elderly man was no longer there. Neither his broom, nor his blanket, not even the teacups he used to prepare. She searched every corner. She asked the priest, "The elderly man who was always cleaning here?" She asked urgently. The priest looked at her, surprised. "No one has been here in weeks, daughter. No one else has keys except for me. And you." Daniela's soul trembled, not out of fear, but out of certainty. She returned to her usual bench. She opened her notebook, and on the last page, written in a handwriting that wasn't hers, she read, "Now you know how to walk. The light is already in you. We will meet again. When the sky embraces you." Her eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness. It was a different kind of cry, a cry of fulfillment. Sometimes, angels don't come down from heaven with wings. Sometimes they simply sweep the floor of an abandoned church, and they teach you to walk when you thought you could never do so again. Daniela closed the notebook and went out into the garden. The sun, for the first time in a long time, was shining without hiding. And as she walked among the flowers she had watered herself, she understood. Not all miracles are seen. Some are only felt. If God has ever sent you someone at the perfect moment, comment, "Angels exist. This story is coming to an end, but your journey with God is just beginning." Subscribe if you believe in hidden miracles and the people who save us without us knowing. Daniela kept going to church, but now she no longer sought desperate answers, rather moments of silence to listen to what her soul already knew. She had learned that faith was not a goal, nor a bright light that solved everything instantly. It was a serene walk in the middle of the night, with the certainty that dawn will come. Her life didn't become perfect. There were still heavy shifts. There were still cloudy days. But her spirit no longer walked alone. One day, a new young nurse arrived at the hospital. She saw her sitting in the locker room, crying silently. Daniela approached, sat next to her, and without saying a word, she offered her a small notebook. On the cover, handwritten, it read, "Encounters with God." The girl looked at her, confused. "And what am I supposed to write here?" Daniela smiled, with the peace of someone who has already walked through the valley of shadow and has come out the other side. "Start with this. I am here, God. That's enough. He will do the rest." That day, Daniela understood the deepest truth, that the light she once received in her darkness now belonged to the world. And so, without announcement, the soul that learned to walk in the shadow became a beacon for others. Did this story touch you? Right. I also want to be light, if you desire to be an instrument of hope for others. Remember, your story can heal someone. Don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe God uses every shadow to prepare a light. Thank you for making it this far. See you in the next story of faith, love, and hidden miracles. God is already working in you, even if you don't see it yet. Have you ever felt that your small gesture could change everything? Sometimes, miracles don't come with trumpets from the sky, but with a kind look, a simple decision, or a coin we give without thinking. Hello, dear friend. Before we begin this story that is sure to touch your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here we share real, inspiring, and faith-filled stories that transform the soul. If you stay until the end, this story may renew your hope in the everyday. Subscribe and activate the bell. It was just any Monday. The city woke up with its usual noise. Honking horns, hurried footsteps, and the aroma of coffee escaping from the bakeries. But for Mariana, it was much more than just a Monday. It was the day when everything in her life seemed to be falling apart. A single mother, a janitor at a small hospital, Mariana had piled up bills, overdue rent, and a sick daughter at home. Still, she left that morning with a heart full of prayer and a phrase on her lips. "Lord, I have nothing, but I trust in you." With her last 20 pesos in her pocket, she walked to the hospital, stopping for a moment at the corner where an old man, in tattered clothes and with a tired gaze, extended his hand without saying a single word. And then it happened. What seemed like an ordinary day transformed into an act of faith that would change her life forever. Asterisk, asterisk. Mariana looked at him for a few seconds. She was in a hurry. Her shift started in 15 minutes and hunger was already tying her stomach in knots. She knew those 20 pesos were her only money to eat that day. But something in the old man's eyes stopped her. It wasn't just hunger. It was loneliness. It was pain. She sighed deeply, reached into her pocket, and without thinking twice, placed the crumpled bill into the man's hands. "God bless you, Grandpa," she whispered with a forced smile, as she resumed her pace, feeling a strange mix of peace and worry. "And now what am I going to eat?" she thought as she walked with an empty stomach, but a soul on fire. She had acted out of faith, a faith without guarantees, without logic, and without expecting anything in return. Friend who's watching this, tell me in the comments, Have you ever given without knowing how you would make it through yourself? Have you done something like that? Drop it below. We read each one with love. When she arrived at the hospital, her boss was waiting with a serious face. Mariana, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Her heart skipped a beat. Was she about to be fired? Had she done something wrong? But what she heard next had no explanation. This morning, the hospital director came unexpectedly, said the boss in a tense tone. He inspected everything, asked about the cleaning staff, observed how they worked, and guess what? Mariana, her heart pounding 1,000 beats per minute, could only shake her head. He stopped to look at your section, said it was spotless, that it was clear someone worked there with dedication and with love. I told him about you. About me? Mariana stammered. Yes, I shared your story, your situation, your effort. The director was moved, and he decided to pay for a full medical scholarship for your daughter. And he wants to offer you a promotion, a new position in administration, with a better salary and fixed hours. Mariana felt her legs give out, her face filled with tears. She couldn't understand. Just an hour ago, she had given away her only meal of the day to a stranger. And now, God was returning it 1,000-fold. Do you see it? Sometimes, when we believe we're giving our last, God is already preparing what's next. If this moment touched your heart, give us an amen in the comments and share it with someone who needs a miracle today. You never know who you might inspire. And as she was still trying to process it all, Mariana walked out of the hospital. And then she saw him again. The old man, sitting, with a different smile, with eyes full of light. Do you want to know what happened next? Mariana approached the old man, still overwhelmed with emotion. Grandpa, she exclaimed tenderly. I wanted to thank you. I don't know why, but I feel like you were part of something beautiful that God did today. The man looked at her and smiled. But this time, it wasn't the faded smile of someone who lives on the street. It was a serene smile, almost heavenly. I didn't need the money, my child, he said gently. I just needed to see if someone still had faith. What do you mean? Asked Mariana, perplexed. The world moves so fast. No one stops to see their neighbor anymore. But you did. You chose to believe even when you had nothing. And that is what moves heaven. Mariana stood frozen. She wanted to ask more, but in the blink of an eye, the man was gone. She looked around. Nothing. Not a trace. As if he had vanished into thin air. Was he an angel? A test? A direct answer from God? Mariana had no certainties, but in her heart, she knew. That simple gesture had been an act of faith, and heaven had seen it. Faith family, if you also believe that God shows up in everyday moments, leave a folded hands in the comments and share this story. Someone who watches it might be on the verge of giving up, and you could be the instrument that lifts their soul. And don't forget to subscribe. Every week we upload stories that comfort, inspire, and strengthen your faith. That night, Mariana came home a different person. She was no longer the woman burdened with worries, with a tired soul and empty pockets. She was someone who had seen God work through something small. Her daughter, Lucia, was asleep on the couch, holding her inhaler in one hand and her teddy bear in the other. Mariana covered her with a blanket and knelt beside her, as she did every night. But this time, she didn't ask for anything. She simply said, "Thank you, Lord, for showing me that when I give without expecting, you multiply. That when I trust even with nothing, you provide. And that miracles don't always come with lightning from heaven. Sometimes they come as a smile, or as an old man who vanishes without a trace." At that moment, a gentle breeze came through the window. The hallway light flickered once, and Mariana felt peace. a peace she hadn't known in a long time. You, who are watching this, I want to ask you a sincere question. What could you do for someone today, even if it seems insignificant? Comment it, write it down, but above all, do it, because heaven is watching every act of faith, no matter how small it may seem. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe, because here we don't just tell stories, we plant hope. And while Mariana slept, something else was happening in another corner of the city. Something that would confirm that her gesture had a much greater impact than she could have ever imagined. In an elegant office, with walls covered in diplomas and a wooden cross hanging above the desk, the hospital director looked at his notebook. He had written down only one name, Mariana Sosa. People like her, he said to his assistant, are the ones holding the world together. A woman who gives everything when she has nothing. I want to know more about her story. Did you know I ran into her this morning before entering? She offered me a warm smile, without knowing who I was. And I saw her give her money to the old man on the corner. You saw that? Asked the assistant. I saw everything. It moved me to my core, and I decided that people like her deserve more. I want to create a special fund to help workers like Mariana, people of faith, real people. Without knowing it, Mariana's act of faith not only changed her own destiny, it was planting something that would reach many more. Friend, listen to this. Faith echoes. Your good deeds can multiply far beyond what you imagine. If you've ever felt like no one sees your effort, remember that God sees everything. And sometimes unexpected people do too. Leave a "I trust in God" in the comments if you also believe that every act has power. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that renew your faith. What began as a difficult Monday was becoming the greatest testimony of Mariana's life. And one more surprise was still to come. One that would leave her speechless. Days went by. Mariana began her new job in administration, with a simple desk but full of hope. Her daughter, Lucia, received the first treatments thanks to the medical scholarship, and began to visibly improve. One morning, while reviewing some files, an envelope with her name appeared on her desk. It had no sender, simply read, "Envelope with arrow for you, who believed without seeing." With trembling hands, Mariana opened it. Inside was a handwritten card. Memo: God multiplies what you give with love. This is only the beginning. Keep believing even when it seems there's no reason to, because He never stops working. Your anonymous angel. And next to the card, a check. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to pay her debts, catch up on rent, and start saving for Lucia's education. Mariana burst into tears, not because of the money, but because she realized that her act of faith had not gone unnoticed, not on earth, and not in heaven. Beautiful family watching us, how many times have we thought that what we do doesn't matter, that our sacrifices are invisible? Today I tell you, they are not. God sees, God hears, and God responds. Maybe not how we expect, but always in His time. If this story touched your soul, subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder of hope today. And so, with a heart full of gratitude, Mariana understood a profound truth. From that day on, Mariana no longer walked with her head bowed in worry. She walked with her heart held high, knowing that true faith doesn't need to see to believe. It only needs love to act. She began helping others like her. Single mothers, forgotten workers, the sick without resources. She didn't have much, but what she did have, she multiplied through service. And every time she saw someone in need, she remembered the old man on the corner. Was he an angel? A test? She never knew. But one thing became clear. A small act of faith can open the door to unimaginable miracles. Because God doesn't look for grand gestures. He looks for willing hearts. Dear friend watching this video, maybe today you're like Mariana, low on money, weighed down by burdens, and whispering a quiet prayer. But if you believe, if you act in faith, even when no one is watching, heaven will move on your behalf. Because it's not about how much you give, but how much you trust. If this story touched your heart, leave us a "I believe in miracles" in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Every week we share real, heartfelt stories that feed the soul and ignite faith. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story, because maybe the next one will speak directly to your heart. Have you ever felt like you can't go on anymore? Like the world is crashing down on you and no one notices? If you've ever been there, stay until the end of this story, because it might be that, just like me, someone will save you without even knowing it. Speech balloon. Before we continue, subscribe if you believe in miracles disguised as people. Do it now, because this story might touch someone else's heart, just like it did with mine. It was a gray Tuesday. I don't remember the exact time, but I remember the feeling: emptiness, loneliness, and that dark thought that kept repeating itself without rest. There's no purpose anymore. Why keep going? I had lost my job, my family had drifted away, and my life seemed to have no value. I walked the streets aimlessly with my head down, hoping the wind would carry me, or that life would simply fade away. And then, just when I thought no one was watching me, someone did. A woman, a complete stranger, smiled at me. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't offer empty words. She simply smiled at me, and that gesture, so simple, so pure, was like a spark that ignited something in me. I didn't know it at the time, but that woman saved me. If ever a small action gave you hope, comment "Thank you, God," and stay with me, because what comes next will change the way you see life. She wasn't an elegant woman, nor did she wear luxurious clothes. She wore an old coat and her hair was tied in a tight bun, like someone who has lived a lot and survived even more. But her smile, that smile had something that can't be explained with words. It was warm, human, real. And even though it lasted only a few seconds, it was as if God Himself had spoken to my heart, saying, "You're still here for a reason. Don't leave. Not today." I sat on a nearby bench, eyes full of tears and my chest tight. That woman continued on her way, unaware that she had stopped a storm by simply looking at me. Has that ever happened to you? Has someone unknowingly given you exactly what you needed? Leave a yes in the comments if a regular person ever did something extraordinary for you, even without knowing it. That day I went home without answers, but with a small seed of faith. I didn't understand what had happened, but for the first time in a long time, I wanted to understand it. And then I started searching for God, not in books, not in churches at first, but in the gestures, in the people, in the invisible that holds up the visible. Subscribe if you believe that God can use you to change someone's life, even without realizing it. Because yes, you too could be that woman for someone. The following days were strange. I didn't have a job. I didn't have direction. But I had something new, a restlessness in my soul. Who was that woman? Why had her smile touched me so deeply? And why couldn't I stop thinking about her? I woke up every morning and walked down the same street, hoping to see her again. Not to thank her, nor to talk to her. Just to confirm that she hadn't been an angel, an illusion, or a last breath of my desperate mind. And then I understood something. Faith doesn't always come with thunder and loud miracles. Sometimes it comes like a breeze, a smile, or a woman who passes by you without knowing she just saved you. Do not forget to show hospitality, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13 verse 2. I found that phrase in a dusty Bible I had left years ago. I opened it as if something were guiding me, and when I read those words, I couldn't hold back the tears. Friend who's watching this, maybe you also have someone in your life who was an angel without knowing it. Mention them in the comments. Write to them. Sometimes heaven touches the earth, and it looks like an ordinary person. If this message is touching your heart, give it a like and share it. You never know who it might reach just when they need it the most. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks walking down the same street, at the same time, hoping to see that woman again. But she didn't show up. And instead of getting frustrated, something changed in me. I started to see other people with different eyes. I saw the young man giving his coat to a homeless man. I saw the elderly woman caring for her grandson while smiling with tenderness. I saw the supermarket cashier giving a loaf of bread to a customer who couldn't pay for it fully. And I understood. God was there, in everyone, in every simple act of love, in every small gesture. I had been looking for a miracle, but what I received was something more powerful, the ability to see God in the everyday. And that ability was given to me by an anonymous woman with a smile that pierced my darkness. Let me ask you something. What if you have also been that woman for someone? What if your actions, no matter how small they seem, are being used by God? Don't underestimate your kindness, because you could be saving lives without knowing it. Subscribe if you believe that simple acts have eternal power. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss stories like this, which nourish the soul and remind us that faith is still alive in us. One afternoon, while helping in a small community kitchen, something I never imagined doing, I heard a familiar voice. It wasn't her tone. It was her spirit. I turned my head, and there she was, the woman, carrying a bag of bread and laughing with a little girl who followed her like a shadow. She had the same calm expression, the same light in her eyes, but this time, she didn't pass me by. She stopped in front of me, not recognizing me. "Would you like a piece of warm bread?" she asked with the same smile. I couldn't answer. I just nodded, as my eyes filled with tears. She sat beside me as if we were old friends. She told me about her daughter, how she had lost her husband, how serving others was her way of thanking God for keeping her alive. And it was then that I understood. She hadn't only saved me, she had also been saved. And now, both of us were being used by God to heal others. Sometimes we think people come by chance, but that's not true. God weaves every encounter with invisible threads of purpose. And today, if you're watching this, it's not by chance either. Write to me in the comments if you've ever had a reunion that seemed like God's work. I'd love to read your testimony. Give it a like if this story has already touched your heart. And share it because someone in silence might be waiting for their own miracle. We sat for over an hour. She spoke simply, without dramatization, but every word she said seemed like a balm for my soul. And then, I gathered the courage to tell her what she had done for me without even knowing it. "I know this may sound strange," I said, "but some time ago, I was about to give up, without hope, without direction, and you passed by me. You didn't say anything, you just smiled, and that gesture saved me." She looked at me in silence, her eyes filled with tears, and her trembling hands squeezed mine. That day I was also broken inside, she confessed. I had nothing to give, but I felt I had to smile, even if it was the only thing I had left. "And now you're telling me that it saved you." We hugged, Two strangers united by God's grace. Two broken souls who, upon crossing paths, lit each other up. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5 verse 16. That moment was more than a coincidence. It was a confirmation. God uses our wounds to heal others. Comment Amen if you believe that God can use even your weakness to bless someone else. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe now. Every story here has a purpose. To remind you that God is still speaking through you, through me, and through all of us. Since that day, my life changed forever. Not because everything magically got resolved, but because I finally understood that my pain hadn't been in vain. God had used it to bring me to that place, to that moment, to that woman. And the most beautiful thing is that I didn't keep the miracle to myself. I decided to share it. I started visiting hospitals, homes for those without families, streets where hopelessness reigns, and every time I saw someone with an empty gaze, I approached with a smile. Not fake, not forced, but a smile full of purpose. And many times, that smile opened doors, hearts, and paths to faith. Dear friend who is listening to this story, maybe you're also carrying wounds. Maybe today you feel like you have nothing to give. But I assure you of something. God can do wonders with the little you have left. Even your smile can be a miracle in someone's life. Give it a like if this story reminded you that you're not alone. And share this video, because someone right now needs to hear this as much as you needed it. Subscribe if you believe that faith is lived, not just said. You can also be light where there is only darkness. Today, when I look back, I don't see coincidences. I see purpose. I see God guiding every step, even when I was walking blindly. That woman never preached, didn't lay hands on me, didn't quote me a verse. She just smiled at me, and in that smile was the whole sky. Because when God's love dwells in someone, it shows, and it doesn't need noise, just presence, compassion, and surrender. To you who are watching this, maybe you didn't know that by just being there, by giving a hug, a gesture, a kind word, you can change someone's life. Maybe you've already done it, and you didn't even realize it. And if today you feel like you're not worth it, that no one sees you, that you're about to give up, remember this: you are also a miracle. You can also save someone without even knowing it. Write to me in the comments if this story touched you. Leave your testimony or simply a thank you, God. We read every message. Share this video with someone going through a difficult time. Let them know that there's still hope. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe. Here you'll find more real stories, full of faith, love, and purpose. Because sometimes, we just need to hear that we're not alone. Have you ever felt like everything is lost? Like your life is a dark tunnel with no way out? Before continuing with this story, I want to ask you a question. Are you brave enough to believe, even when everything seems to be against you? If so, stay until the end, because this story might restore your faith. And if you're someone who believes in miracles, subscribe and join us in every story we touch here with our hearts. Because sometimes all we need to keep going is a little bit of hope. It was a gray day, literally. The sky was covered with heavy clouds. The wind whispered a sad tune. And in the middle of that cold landscape, an elderly man walked slowly, his gaze lost and his shoulders hunched. His name was Don Elias. He was 76 years old, and until a year ago he had everything. A loving wife, a daughter who visited him every weekend, and a woodworking shop he had built with his own hands. But in less than 6 months, life flipped him over like a dry leaf in the wind. His wife passed away from a sudden illness. His daughter, after an accident, fell into a coma, and the workshop, he had to sell it to pay the hospital bills. Now, every morning, Elias walked to the same park bench. The same one, always the same. There he sat and looked at the sky. Sometimes he prayed. Other times he just cried silently. People saw him and thought he was crazy. But no, he was just waiting for a miracle. Would you like something unexpected to happen in this park? Do you believe that God can use pain to create something beautiful? Then don't go, because what's about to happen will shake your soul. That day, everything seemed the same. Don Elias arrived as always at the park, settled on his bench, and took out from his pocket a small, worn photograph. His daughter, Clara, at only 10 years old, hugging him while he held a kite. A tear fell onto the picture. "How long, Lord?" he murmured. "How long this silence?" It was then that he heard a little voice beside him. "Why are you crying, sir?" Elias jumped. Beside him, standing, was a small boy no older than 7. Messy hair, patched pants, and a smile that stood out against the grayness of the surroundings. "It's nothing, son. Just memories," Elias replied, trying to smile. "My grandmother says that when someone cries, they're making space for God to put something beautiful inside." Elias looked at him in surprise. He wasn't used to children approaching him, and even less to hearing such deep words from someone so small. "What's your name?" he asked. "Matthias." "And you?" "Elias." The boy sat next to him without asking for permission, as if he had known him his whole life. "I come here because my dad went to heaven. My grandmother says that sometimes sadness wants to live in the heart, but that one must be brave and keep the door closed to it." Elias looked at him with teary eyes. That boy didn't know it, but his words were healing his soul. Do you also believe that there are people who come into our lives by chance? If this story is touching your heart, like it and leave a comment. Hope lives in me, because what Matthias will do in the next pages, you'll never forget. Since that day, Matthias and Elias began meeting every morning. The elderly man, who had once carried only sadness, started bringing with him a thermos of hot chocolate and 2 tin cups, one for himself and another for the boy who, unknowingly, had begun to light up his life. "Today I dreamed of my daughter Matthias," he said one day, as the steam from the chocolate rose between them. "She was awake. She looked at me, smiled, and what did she do? She said, 'Dad, keep waiting. Don't give up.'" Matthias smiled and settled on the bench, hugging his legs. "You know what I think? That hope is like a seed. You have to water it every day with faith, even if you don't see anything grow." Elias closed his eyes. How was it possible that such a small child spoke with so much wisdom? He felt that God was speaking to him through that child. A few days later, Matthias didn't show up, nor the next day, or the next one. Elias began to worry. The bench was cold without the presence of the boy. The silence, which had once been usual, now hurt more. 5 days passed, and then on the 6th day, a middle-aged woman appeared, her face marked by exhaustion and worry. "Are you Don Elias?" "Yes." "Do you know me?" "My name is Rosa. I'm Matthias's grandmother. He talked to me about you before he got sick." The elderly man felt a lump in his throat. "Is he okay?" "They hospitalized him. He's in a delicate condition. But he told me that if I ever came to the park and found you, I should give you this." The woman took out a small envelope. Inside, there was a folded sheet with the shaky handwriting of a child. "Don't stop waiting, Don Elias. Sometimes God takes his time, but he always arrives. I'm going to get better. And you'll also see your daughter wake up. If this made you feel something, share this video with someone who's silently struggling. Maybe, like Elias, they just need a Matthias in their life. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because the miracle has not yet begun. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. Matthias's letter was on his chest, wrinkled from how many times he had read it. How can a child have so much faith, and I so little? He wondered as he looked at the ceiling of his modest room. Forgive me, Lord, for giving up too soon. The next day, Elias did something he hadn't done in months. He went to the hospital. He asked for permission to visit Matthias. At first, they hesitated. But when he said his name, the nurse looked at him with a smile. So, you're Don Elias. Matthias talked about you every day. He's waiting for you eagerly. The elderly man entered the room. The child was connected to a machine, pale, but when he saw him, his eyes lit up. Don Elias, he whispered with a weak but excited voice. I knew you'd come. Elias walked over and gently took his hand. I'm here, champ. I brought hot chocolate. But this time I'll save it for when you get out. And your daughter, how is she? Elias took a deep breath. She's still in a coma. But this time, I came to tell you something I never thought I'd tell anyone. Matthias looked at him, curious. I'm starting to believe again. The boy smiled. A weak smile, but full of light. Then we've already won, he said, because having hope is also being brave, right? Elias nodded with tears in his eyes. At that moment, there was no pain that could stand against the truth that this little one had just reminded them both of. Are you also fighting with something that seems impossible? Write in the comments, I choose to have hope, because the greatest battle is first won in the heart. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and don't miss what's about to happen, because sometimes what seems like the end is just the beginning of the miracle. 2 weeks passed. Elias visited Matthias every day. He told him stories, talked about his workshop, promised him that one day they would build a kite together like the one in the old photo. And one day, Matthias was gone. No, he hadn't died. He had been discharged. The little one recovered in a way that the doctors couldn't explain. His system responded in an extraordinary way. One of them said, as if something or someone was lifting him from the inside. Elias, with his heart full of gratitude, knew exactly what it was. Faith. When they returned to the park together for the first time after his recovery, Matthias took Elias's hand and stopped in front of their usual bench. This bench won't be for crying anymore, right? No, son. Now it will be for giving thanks. They sat down. The elderly man opened his old thermos, and they shared the hot chocolate in silence. The city was still as noisy, still as gray, but in that little corner of the park, the whole world shone. Then Elias's phone rang. He looked at it. It was the hospital. His breath caught in his throat. Yes? He answered, his voice trembling. Don Elias? This is Dr. Ramos. You need to come. Your daughter just woke up. The elderly man couldn't speak. He just let the tears fall. Matthias looked at him, not fully understanding. What happened? Elias hugged him tightly. A miracle happened, son. A miracle that only happens when one dares to wait, even if it hurts. Do you realize? Sometimes the answer comes when we no longer have strength. But hope was always the bridge. If this story touched your soul, share this video with someone who needs to remember they're not alone. And subscribe, because in the next part, we'll see how Elias, Clara, and Matthias discover together that life still has so much to give if one has the courage to wait. Elias didn't remember ever running so much in his life. He got on the bus with his heart racing and his hands trembling. Every minute felt like an eternity. What if it wasn't true? What if he had heard wrong? But when he entered the hospital room, there she was, Clara, with her eyes open, looking at him. "Dad," she whispered. "Is it you?" Elias fell to his knees, as if his legs couldn't hold such a miracle. "Yes, my girl. Yes, it's me. Thank you, my God. Thank you." The doctors said there was no logical explanation. She was months without significant brain activity. A nurse murmured, "This doesn't happen every day." But Elias knew that faith doesn't need logic to work. The days passed. Clara was recovering little by little, and when she was strong enough, Elias took her to the park. There, Matthias was waiting for them with his usual smile. "Is she Clara?" he asked with bright eyes. "Yes," Elias replied, "and I want you to know something, son. You helped save both of us." Clara knelt down in front of the boy, still weak but emotional. "My dad talked about you every day, even when I was asleep. Thank you for not leaving him alone." Matthias shrugged with that innocence that only children have. "I just did what my grandma taught me. When someone is sad, you have to be close, even if you don't say anything." "And you? Are you close to someone who needs company?" Write in the comments, "I want to be hope for others," because sometimes the greatest miracle is simply being present. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the last 2 chapters of this story will show you how a wounded life can become a source of light for others. Time passed, and the bench in the park was no longer just a resting place. It became a small altar of stories, laughter, and gratitude. Clara, fully recovered, started going every Saturday with her dad and Matthias. They brought buns, hot chocolate, and open ears for anyone who needed to talk. One afternoon, a man with a tired face and a lost gaze approached. He sat a few meters away, his head down, saying nothing. Matthias stood up, grabbed one of the buns, and without asking, offered it to him. "It's fresh," he said, smiling. "And if you want, you can sit with us. There's room for sad stories, but also for those that end well." The man looked at him in silence, and then accepted. He didn't speak much, but as he left, he smiled. A shy smile, pained, but real. "Did you see that?" Clara said to her father. It's like something inside him changed. Elias looked at her with pride. "Because what changes the world, Clara, are not speeches, the small acts filled with faith." Matthias interrupted, raising his cup of chocolate. "Let's toast to that, to hope, because sometimes being brave is just continuing to believe, even when you see nothing." Everyone laughed. And in that moment, in that ordinary park, under that normal sky, something sacred was happening. Do you realize? The ordinary becomes miraculous when we live it with faith. Write in the comments, "I want to be light for someone." And don't forget to share this story if it touched your heart. Subscribe, because in the final page, you'll discover why Matthias came into their lives and how a simple child can change someone's world forever. It was a sunny day. The trees in the park gently dropped their leaves, as if silently celebrating what was about to happen. Elias had prepared something special. He had been working secretly in his workshop for weeks. When Matthias arrived, he found the old man with Clara, both wearing knowing smiles. "What's going on? Why are you looking at me like that?" "Close your eyes, champ," Elias said. Matthias obeyed, laughing. When he opened them, in front of him was a beautiful kite with the colors of the sky at sunset. "Is it for me?" "Not just for you," Elias replied, excited. "It's ours. We built it with hope, so that you'll never forget that even the invisible, like the wind, can lift us." They ran to the field. Elias held the kite, Matthias pulled the string, and together they made it fly. Clara watched them from the bench, wiping away a tear. And then Elias understood. God hadn't just given him his daughter back. He had gifted him a grandson of the soul. Matthias wasn't just any child. He was a messenger, a divine spark that entered his life when he needed it the most. "Thank you, God," Elias whispered, looking up at the sky. "Thank you for teaching me that having hope, even when everything seems lost, is one of the bravest acts a human being can have." And so, between laughter, wind, and hot chocolate, the story of three hearts that came together through a miracle called faith came to an end. If this story touched your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Write in the comments, "I also choose to have hope," and share this video with someone who needs to remember that God is never late. Thank you for watching until the end. Subscribe if you want to keep receiving stories that heal, inspire, and remind you that even when we can't see a way out, God is already preparing the door. Have you ever wondered why painful things happen, even when you strive to do good? Stay with me, because this story might give you the answer your heart has been searching for. And if you're one of those who believes that everything has a purpose, even if you don't understand it yet, I invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here, every story touches the soul. It all began in a small town surrounded by mountains, where winters were as harsh as Clara's life. A woman in her 40s, with hands worn from hard work and eyes that once knew how to dream, but today only knew how to cry in silence. Her husband had died 3 years ago in an accident, and since then, Clara fought alone to provide for her 2 children, Samuel and Lucia. She worked from dawn to dusk, cleaning houses, washing others' clothes, and still barely managed to put food on the table. Every night, when the children slept, Clara knelt by her bed, not to ask for riches, not to demand miracles, just to say, "Lord, I don't understand anything, but I trust you." A simple phrase, but filled with a faith that wouldn't break, even though her soul was on the verge of collapsing. One day, when it seemed like nothing could get worse, Clara received a letter. It was from the bank. In 30 days, she would lose her home due to unpaid bills. The world collapsed around her. Where would her children sleep? Why was God allowing this when she had never stopped believing? Has this happened to you? Have you felt that heaven stays silent when you need an answer the most? Don't go away, because what happened to Clara will shake you. Clara didn't sleep that night. The clock struck 3 in the morning when she got up with a tight knot in her chest. She went to the kitchen, made a strong coffee, and sat at the empty table. She looked at the envelope and held it in her hands as if she were holding her destiny. Tears ran down her cheeks, but there was no one to see them, only God, and she knew it. "Lord," she whispered, "if this is part of your plan, help me understand it. But if it's not your plan, then please open a door. Just one. Not for me, for my children." The next day, while cleaning a house on the other side of town, Clara heard a conversation on the local radio. A woman was talking about how she had overcome ruin, how she had lost everything, and how God had surprised her just when she thought there was no way out. Clara stopped to listen. She didn't know that voice, but every word pierced her deeply. And then, something curious happened. When she finished her work, the owner of the house, an older woman whom Clara barely knew, offered her something strange. "Clara, I saw you differently today. "Are you okay?" "No, but I'm alive," she replied, trying to smile. The woman nodded slowly and went to get something. She came back with an envelope. "This is not charity. It's obedience. God put it in my heart to give it to you. I don't know why, but I know you need it." Clara trembled. She thanked her with a broken voice and didn't open the envelope until she got home. Inside, there was exactly the amount she owed to the bank. She collapsed to her knees. She couldn't believe it. Coincidence? Luck? No, it was an answer. And if you've ever felt that God arrives late, stay. What's about to happen will show you that nothing happens in vain. Clara didn't say it out loud, but that night she knew something had changed. Not just because of the money, but because, for the first time in a long time, she felt she was not alone. There was a presence that listened to her, that saw her effort, her tears, and that, in silence, acted when she needed it the most. She paid the debt, and with it, she gained something more valuable than a house: peace. Weeks went by. Life was still hard, yes, but it no longer felt the same. There were tough days, cold days, but now, Clara left the house with a quiet smile and a phrase she repeated in her mind every morning: "Nothing happens in vain." And then, without looking for it, a new opportunity knocked on her door. While she was cleaning an office, one of the employees heard her talking with her daughter on the phone. The tenderness, the patience, the loving tone with which she spoke caught his attention. "Do you always talk like that with your children?" he asked her, not knowing her very well. "Of course," Clara replied. "They are my greatest treasure. You know, we're looking for someone for reception. No experience needed, just someone reliable. Would you be interested?" Clara thought it was a joke. "Reception? I've only cleaned houses. Faith moves mountains," the man told her, "and you can tell that you have a lot of it." She agreed to try. They trained her. She learned quickly, and in less than 2 months, Clara already had a decent salary, a more human schedule, and even time to take her children to school. Do you see what's happening here? When everything seemed lost, when the silence hurt more than the poverty, God was already weaving a plan that Clara never would have imagined. And you still haven't seen the end. A year later, Clara's life was different. She hadn't become rich. She didn't live in a mansion, but something inside her shone brighter than ever. It was the certainty that God hadn't abandoned her. And the most incredible thing was that now many people approached her seeking advice. The woman who once cried in silence now comforted others. In the office, her coworkers said Clara had something special. A calmness, a peace, as if she carried with her an invisible light. One day, they invited her to share her testimony at a small local church. She had never spoken in front of a group. Her hands shook. But when she stood before that humble congregation, the only thing she said was, "I am proof that God is never late. He only acts when his purpose is ready, and when our hearts are too." And in the silence of the room, a woman in the last row began to cry. She was young, a single mother, desperate. After the service, she approached Clara and said, "Thank you for speaking. I was going to do something crazy today, but you restored my faith." "Don't thank me," Clara replied gently. "Thank the one who never leaves us, even when everything seems dark." And in that instant, Clara understood everything. Those days of pain were not in vain. Every tear, every sleepless night, every unanswered plea, it all had a purpose: to be a testimony for others. Because sometimes, God allows us to go through the storm, not to punish us, but to prepare us, to turn us into light in the midst of other people's darkness. Life was no longer perfect, but Clara didn't need it to be perfect anymore. Only real, purposeful, and sustained by faith. Sundays became her sacred moment. She never missed church, and her children grew up seeing their mother not only as an example of struggle, but also as a living testimony of God's love. One afternoon, while they cooked together in the small kitchen where she used to cry for not having anything to give them to eat, her son Samuel, now 11 years old, asked her, "Mom, why do you say God saved you if we never saw him coming?" Clara knelt down to his height and looked at him with tenderness. "Because God doesn't always appear with wings or shining lights, son. Sometimes he comes disguised as a letter, or as an elderly woman with an envelope in her hand, or as a stranger who sees something in you that you yourself had forgotten. So everything bad that happened to us was part of the plan?" "Yes, Samuel. And although it hurt at the time, today I know that nothing happened in vain." The boy nodded, as if something very big was being engraved in his heart. And without knowing it, that seed of faith his mother had sown with tears was beginning to bloom in the next generation. Dear viewer, if you're watching this story and going through a moment where everything seems dark, don't give up. God isn't done with you. And perhaps, like Clara, you are being prepared to comfort someone else. Because remember, none of what you are living is in vain. The years passed. Samuel grew up, and so did Lucia. They both finished their studies, not with luxury, but with effort, love, and that unbreakable courage that only a mother who trusts in God can pass on. Clara grew old with dignity. She didn't have a college degree, but her wisdom filled entire rooms. She was invited to speak at other churches, women's groups, and homes where despair had taken deep root. Every time she stood up to share her testimony, she repeated the same thing. If you are going through the valley, if you see no way out, don't leave before your time. God is still writing your story. And believe me, nothing happens in vain. Once, at the end of a talk, a woman with a face worn by suffering came up to her and said, "Hearing you made me realize I'm not alone. I was drowning, and your words were like fresh air." Clara hugged her without saying anything more, because sometimes the deepest language is that of a shared tear between two souls who have known pain and also redemption. And you know something, dear viewer? Behind every wound you've lived through, there's something that can be born: compassion, wisdom, hope for others. Clara wasn't a hero from books. She was an ordinary woman, but it was her faith in the midst of the storm that made her extraordinary. And you can be too. Maybe you don't see it yet, but all that you don't understand today will make sense one day. Because in God's hands, even pain is transformed into purpose. Clara's story ended the way the best miracles begin: in silence, but with an eternal impact. Years later, with her hair now white and her voice slow, Clara sat on a bench in the park in front of her old house. She didn't say much. She just watched the children running, the sun setting between the trees, and the world continuing to turn. Samuel, now a young adult, came to visit her every weekend with his wife and their little daughter. "Grandma," the little girl would say with a contagious laugh, "is it true that you prayed for bread when there was nothing?" Clara smiled. "Not just for bread, my love. I prayed for strength, for faith to keep going." And then she would tell her, without drama, but with emotion, how one day she lost everything, and how, despite it all, God never let her go. "Were you scared?" the little one asked. "A lot, but fear doesn't have the final word when you believe. Because when God is in the middle of your story, even pain becomes a seed." Clara didn't leave material riches, but she left something that neither time, nor death, nor darkness can erase: a life lived with faith. And that's why, when she finally passed away, her family didn't cry over loss. They cried with gratitude, because they knew her story would live on in every person who had heard it, in every heart touched by her testimony. And you who have come this far, listen closely. Everything has a purpose. Every tear, every blow, every moment when you thought about giving up. God is using it, even if you can't see it yet.
If you've made it this far, it wasn't by chance. Maybe this story found you just when your heart needed a sign. Maybe you're in the middle of your own storm, feeling like no one sees your struggle, that your prayers are lost in the void, that your strength is running out. But listen closely. Nothing you're going through is in vain. Every tear has value. Every silence holds an answer. Every dark night hides a dawn that you can't yet see. God hasn't forgotten you. He hears, he sees, he cares, even when you feel like everything is in ruins. Clara lived it. Many have lived it. And you will live it too. Maybe today you don't understand the why, but the day will come when you understand the for what. And then, you will look back and say with confidence, thank you, Lord, because even in my pain, you were working. Before I finish, I want to ask you something important. Subscribe to this channel. Not for numbers. Not for trends. But because here we share stories that that lift you up, that remind you that you are not alone. And if this story touched your heart, share it. Maybe someone on the edge of the abyss needs it today. And never forget. Even if you don't understand what you're going through right now, nothing happens in vain.